A new world order, Joe Biden says. It's a phrase that gets people's attention. Welcome back to the Clay and Buck Show. We've got a lot of challenges here at home. You could even say, and I think you should, failures under the Biden regime up to this point. The border, inflation, the economy, crime in cities. Find me a major policy area where there's been decision-making, energy, fossil fuel regulations, and market intrusions by Biden and his team. All this stuff that you've seen has been bad. But they really like to focus now on global leadership. They're trying to reestablish, I think, Joe Biden as the steady hand on the world stage that we were promised that we've never actually seen. This is the remarkable thing. Joe Biden has spent longer than I've been alive, I think, in public office, and never once have you said, wow, he really led on that issue. You know, that important treaty got signed because of Senator or Vice President or now President Joe. But he's saying there's going to be a new world order now, and I want to talk about what that will look like.
We are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is the time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
I think, Clay, he's right in that there's a shift underway. I think, unfortunately, his administration is playing a role in it in a bad way, away from a sense of American leadership and America as the best, last, freest hope of mankind, and toward China, Russia, non-aligned states that are finding ways to exploit weaknesses, notably recently the fact that we are more reliant than we should be on foreign energy sources, but on a whole range of ways and factors. It feels like a Biden-led new world order is one in which Putin and Xi and others are getting a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah, and one of the big challenges that we've got is when we grew up, Buck, there was a universal enemy in some way. Beating the Russians was something that was in the back of your mind if you were growing up in the 70s, the 80s, the 60s, any of those eras. You really had the sense of America as a force for good in the world. We talked about, to start the show off, the protest that's going on at Yale, at law school. What unites all of these woke ideologies, Buck, and I don't think we spend enough time talking about this, is the idea that America is evil and was founded on evil grounds. And that as a result, our progress does not matter because at inception we were founded upon a great evil, which is slavery. And so if there is no moral authority in America, then you tear down and denigrate the institutions of America. And what many of these woke imbeciles are not sophisticated enough to understand is you have to compare American ideology with ideologies around the world right now. China is doing and committing genocide on its own people right now. And that's why, to me, the window of the world showing up in Beijing, Buck, we bent the knee to China after they lied about COVID, after they created COVID in a lab, in my opinion, based on all of the evidence. And the whole world, every democratic country, us, Canada, England, Australia, all these places that are supposed to be standing for the betterment of human rights around the world, all showed up and bent the knee at Beijing for the Winter Olympics and said virtually zero, nobody did, about China's obligations and responsibilities in the world.
Do you think that some of the emotional validation that it seems many in the West, notably here in this country, seek with their fervent support of the Ukrainian cause and the righteousness of it, and the flag pins, and the Zelensky is, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Pericles wrapped into one, whatever. Do you think some of that is in reaction to, for those who at least pay attention to these things, the underlying recognition that China is engaged in human rights crimes and atrocities on a regular basis? China is undermining the United States. China is a totalitarian state. And we were basically all clapping during the Olympics while the Chinese Communist Party was saying, yeah, you guys will bend the knee. You know what I mean? Do you think that it's almost like a compensation? We're so anti-Putin in some cases, in some places here, because we've already sort of said, well, I mean, come on, I really like those cheap products I get from China, and I don't want to cause any problems.
Well, I think that's a good point, and that raises the question of the precedent that's being set with Russia. I mean, I asked this question, Buck, on the show after the State of the Union with Joe Biden when we saw all the politicians with Ukrainian lapel flags that they were wearing at the State of the Union. How many people would wear Taiwan lapel flags if China invaded Taiwan? Would we isolate China's global economy, businesses, like we have been able to do with Russia? I severely doubt it. I mean, Buck, you and I are both fans of Top Gun, the movie. They took the Taiwan flag off of Maverick's jacket in Top Gun 2 to avoid offending the Chinese. They changed in the remake of Red Dawn, they changed the country that invades America from China to North Korea because they wanted to avoid offending China. There are no Asian bad guys. There are no Asian villains in any Hollywood films now because China has got all of Hollywood by the throat, and that's a metaphor of the larger control that China exerts upon American business everywhere.
Well, this is also why when people get all mobilized as and very preachy on countries that they're outraged about, their human rights abuses. Look, it's if you're right, you're right, but you also need to be consistent or need to be aware of inconsistencies. And the fact of the matter is, we are, because the elites in this country make so much money from China and need, in their minds, access to the Chinese market. We have a relativism, if you will, of human rights standards. Never mind, we talk about Saudi Arabia. We could talk about a lot of places with whom we do business. But there are the good guys and the bad guys in our minds. And, I think that the discussion around Ukraine and around Russia has fallen into this a simplistic narrative that is not particularly helpful to the moment, which is first and foremost about how we get the bullets and the bombs to stop, right? I mean, how do we get people to be safe? And then we can figure out what the new world order, as Biden says, may be. But I don't think it's helpful to us to think that there's a simple storyline here. And if only we all rallied to one side or the other in just our words and the way that we sort of promote individual brands on social. I don't mean us. I mean everybody, right? Everyone's like, oh, I stand with Ukraine. Okay, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
And how do we bring this whole thing to a conclusion? And I think there's also been I do believe there's been a transfer of the mass mobilization mentality from I listen to Fauci, I obey the elites, I do whatever I'm told with COVID, to anything Ukraine needs, we should do. Ukraine, this is the most important thing. There are a lot of people, and that's why I found that study or the poll out of Canada so interesting, where there's a direct correlation. I mean, basically the more shots you get, the more involved you want as a Canadian, the military to be there. I am certain if there was a poll like it in America, it would be the same result.
The crazy thing, Buck, is emotion governs everything. Most people don't take the time. And the wild thing is, remember initially when social media kind of took off, Buck, the idea was, wow, this is going to be the full flourishment of the First Amendment. How quickly does social media demand consensus? And if you step outside of the lines of consensus, I'm not sure there's ever been any American media entities that have enforced consensus more than social media companies.
There was a guy, I think the book is called The Net Delusion. I read it many, many years ago. And his point was that this notion And again, I'm going back now, I think 15 years, so I might be. But I think The Net Delusion was the name of the book. And the notion was that we believe that the internet is going to create this free flow of information that liberates all mankind in terms of speech and the dissemination of knowledge. And there is some truth to that. There's also truth to we have entered the panopticon, which is it's a prison where you're being watched at all times. I mean, we have seen, and China is obviously pioneering this, the
No doubt.
usage of the technology that was supposed to free us all and allow us to communicate instantaneously, and does at some levels, being turned now increasingly into tools of suppression, tools of control, of constant surveillance, and let's be honest, of power, as we're seeing from the social media companies in this country who are telling us, bend the knee, say a man is a woman, peasant, or else.